speculations. Hey internet, so today I want to talk about controversy. Specifically, I want to talk about what it is, where it comes from and why, and of course different ways that we deal with it in our everyday lives. Although that might have to wait for a part 2 video type situation, because honestly the closer I've come to actually filming this video, the more I've struggled with not only what I want to say, but what purpose I want to serve by saying it, whatever it actually turns out to be. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, I just want to focus on what controversy is and what makes it different, if at all, from other types of disagreement and opposition, because those are the questions that have been giving me the most trouble. A few key things that kept popping up in my search for a satisfactory definition of controversy were: 1, the idea that it's something that in one way or another takes place in the public eye, and 2, it's a discussion that is drawn out over time. Specifically, the Oxford English Dictionary defines it as public discussion and argument about something that many people strongly disagree about, disapprove of, or are shocked by. Now, what I actually find most interesting about this definition is the way in which it slowly moves away from the realm of disagreement into one that's more focused on reaction and emotion, which I think gives fantastic insight into the question of where controversies stem from in the first place, and especially as to why controversial subjects will always be difficult to address. Another theme that kept popping up in my research was the idea of history and the way in which controversies are contextualized by history. Although I think it's important to note that all history was once a current event, just as all current events will one day be history. You do know you're starting to talk in circles, right? Yes, I know that what I'm saying might be starting to become a little bit nonsensical, but it's because I'm doing my best to stick to theory rather than bringing up actual recent, potentially controversial events. And frankly, it was my fear of talking about things like that that inspired me to make this video. And it's not because I'm afraid of opposition or of expressing an unpopular or not unpopular enough opinion, because this is the internet after all. It's not even because I'm afraid of speaking out too soon and being insensitive, or speaking out too late and being irrelevant. My point is that I'm not afraid of saying something that's going to make me unpopular, whatever that even means. It's just that those things that I was talking about make controversy and discussions on controversial topics different from those of other types of disagreement and opposition, and they mean that those conversations need to be held and handled very differently. Now, what I'm not saying is that people somehow shouldn't or can't have an opinion when it comes to a controversial topic, or even somehow that controversy doesn't involve opinion. I mean, what would be the point of this video if that were the case? But what I am saying is that those histories, those emotions, those visceral reactions, those human elements and perspectives and so on complicate not only the having of those opinions, but their implementation by things like, I don't know, legislative or other policy changes that happen in reaction to, and I'm just spitballing here, things like tragedy. And yes, when I say complicate, I'm talking about being right or wrong, correct or incorrect, and yes, that includes having and acting upon an opinion that you believe to be, to use repetition for the sake of emphasis, right or wrong, correct or incorrect. But to be fair, I'm also using complicate to mean the complication of what it means to be right or wrong, correct or incorrect in these particular scenarios. Which, to acknowledge the cyclical nature of my speech before my close to the camera self has another chance to interrupt, brings me back to the whole idea of, 1, controversies being difficult to discuss, and 2, the ways that we end up actually handling those discussions. And although there are countless scenarios possible, I'm going to stick to the following. On the one hand, I think it's really difficult for someone who thinks that they have a detached, objective view to look someone who's been directly affected by these kinds of events in the eye and to tell them not to be angry, not to react, to be patient, to repress their passion, and that they're somehow wrong for feeling and thinking what they feel and think. On the other hand, I also think it would be difficult for someone who has experienced recent tragedy or even inherited an ancestral suffering to honestly be able to say that their opinion is free of any type of bias that maybe possibly wasn't the most constructive. What I'm starting to think is that maybe the reason these types of discussions are so difficult to have is that they're actually two separate discussions, and that there exists a desperate need to create the space for that. For us to take the time to mourn together over tragedy, whatever that means, respectively, and then to take a step back to separate not the context of whatever events led to whatever tragedy, but just in an effort to come to a vital consensus. I think the main thing that makes discourse on controversy so difficult is that we take offense to opposition because we see it as a sign of the other person not being sympathetic to our pain, and I just don't think that's true, at least not most of the time, and hopefully making room for those two conversations to take place would do something to help things along. But I don't know, that's all that I have for right now. But what about you, Internet? I'm sure you have an opinion. Have you ever felt like you couldn't say what you thought just because the topic was considered controversial? Do you think that these types of conversations are only difficult when you're having them with people you disagree with, or do you think that they're always difficult to some extent? Leave your stories and responses in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and check me out on all the other types of social media so we can keep this conversation going. Because taking everything offensively, expressing said offense in a comment section, and having a discussion that isn't really all that productive, well, that's what the internet's for, right? But it would be such, I mean, with